Welcome back here with us on Times Now, and there's some breaking update that we want to highlight for our viewers at this point in time. And a final notice has been sent by the centre to Twitter, and this is on the IT rules in India. Remember, a deadline was given to the social media platforms, social media intermediaries in India to comply with the new IT rules. Many of them did not comply with the new IT rules, and today the latest update is that the final notice has been sent to Twitter by centre. There is a warning, and a clear warning, a stern warning that has been given to Twitter. Let's straight away go across to my colleague Megha Prasad joining us with the details. Megha, firstly, bring to us the key highlights of this letter, because there is a very stern message firmly the centre has communicated to Twitter via this letter. If you want to do business in India, be prepared to follow the rules. Otherwise, then you might have to face the law.
Yes, Hannah. So at first, let me tell you this, that like you rightly said, the firm and final communication from the Government of India that has gone to Twitter to say that if you do not comply now, you will be liable for action. Now, what this letter basically says, I'm going to take you through the main points of this letter. This is, of course, letter was written to Twitter after a meeting was chaired by the IT Minister, Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, and all the key officers were part of this meeting. It was then discussed in that meeting that even though the guideline expiry date, or the intermediary guidelines that were put in place, and all of these social media platforms were asked to comply with, and a deadline was set of 26 May, that's over. Even after the expiry of this 3-month period that was given to them to comply, Twitter happens to be, Hina, the only platform that has not complied. Now, I can tell you for sure, because we've been tracking the story closely, Twitter happens to be the only social media platform that has not complied with this guideline, because as of 48 hours back, we are told that every other social media platform has come back to the government with a written communication that they have appointed all the officers that the guideline sought to. So there are 3 important positions that needed to be filled by these social media platforms, apart from other guidelines that needed to be followed. And Twitter happens to be the only one that has not done so. So the compliance has not yet happened from Twitter. Twitter is yet to appoint India-based chief compliance officer, the nodal officer, and also the grievance officer for redressal of all the problems of the users against misuse or abuse of the platform. Now, seeing this delaying attitude of Twitter, it has now been decided by the government to send a final and firm communication to Twitter, asking them to comply immediately with these requirements, failing which resultant consequences as enjoined in law shall follow. Now, a couple of these points I need to explain here. Like I said, a nodal contact person, a grievance officer, a grievance redressal officer, plus one more person, 3 people who need to be appointed. What has Twitter done? Twitter has very smartly appointed a person who happens to represent in the courts here in New Delhi. So basically a lawyer who was representing Twitter, and the court has been appointed as the grievance redressal officer. And this, of course, the government of India is not going to accept. They have already communicated that this is not acceptable, because they are not going to accept a person who is not a part of Twitter, an outside person in a statutory position. So Twitter will, of course, have to change its decision.
Megha, I'm just interrupting you there, requesting you to stay on with us. Right. I'll come to you, Megha, in just a bit. Shehzad Poonawalla, Times Now's contributor, is also now joining us on the broadcast. Megha continues to be with us. So, viewers, it's a 2-page letter that has gone from centre to Twitter. And if you look at the content that we are describing for our viewers, it can be divided into 4 parts specifically. 1, centre has clearly expressed its dismay. Second, as Megha was telling us, centre has called out the compliance eyewash in this particular letter. Centre has issued an ultimatum to Twitter. Now, this is very important. And lastly, it's a last warning that has been given to Twitter in good faith. Shehzad, what do you make of the content of this letter, the stern warning that has gone?
Well, the government of India has made it extremely clear and extremely clear to Twitter that the non-compliance of the guidelines which have been issued in January, February, and now the time for that has completely, in a sense, gone away by the time by which they had to comply with it. Now, what is being said fundamentally by the government is very, very important, that this is a last warning or a last notice that is being given to Twitter simply out of goodwill, and that if they fail to comply even now, then the protection or the exemption that they have from various liabilities under Section 79, under which they claim to be an intermediary, those will go away, and they will be liable under Indian law, whether it's the IT Act or whether it's the Indian Penal Code, just like anybody else is supposed to be held liable. So Twitter has been told in no uncertain terms. What also Twitter has been told is that India is a vibrant, thriving democracy. But the fact of the matter is that after completing even 1 decade of operations, Twitter does not think that the Indian people are to be taken as seriously as it takes people abroad. You would find that Twitter goes for congressional hearings abroad. Twitter complies to their law and order requirements abroad. But when it comes to the people of India, a democratic country of the people of India, it applies double standards, and it does not comply to the rules and regulations that have been laid down by the government of India and by the Indian state. So that kind of double standard, dual standard will not be appreciated. Now, Twitter can cry as much as it can about violation of free speech, but everybody knows that this is not a free speech issue. This is an issue of double standards, lack of accountability, and Twitter abrogating to itself powers that it should not be under Section 79. That is the power of editorializing, of taking judgment calls, which intermediaries are not entitled to do. And even after all of that, it fails to comply with the guidelines laid down. So this, in a sense, is a last warning, a stern warning being given out to Twitter by the government.
Right. Right. Shehzad, Megha, requesting both of you to stay on with us. We have Suresh Nakwa, political analyst, joining us on the broadcast. We also have with us Ashutosh, who's a political analyst. Good afternoon to both of you. Suresh Nakwa, to you first. We've seen Centre becoming quite aggressive when it comes to compliance with the intermediary rules are concerned. Centre has been quite firm this time, and this message, this notice in a way that has gone only suggests that enough is enough is the message that probably Centre is trying to give to social media platform like Twitter. Do you think now we are moving in a direction like Nigeria, wherein non-compliance will not be tolerated and action will be taken?
This is not a question of becoming aggressive or, not aggressive. All the social media platforms were informed in this. Guidelines were issued in February. They were given a time of 3 months to comply with them. When all other can comply, why can't Twitter comply? And even whatever a grievance officer they have employed, they have just outsourced it to one law firm, who doesn't have any power in his hand. So they are just doing, you can say, a makeup of things. And basically, Twitter, this is not an intermediary, it is more of a political player now. If you see, what was the logic and reason to suspend the account of Honorable Vice President of India? It was a malicious act on behalf of Twitter. And the explanation given by them is more bizarre.
Okay. Ashutosh, what is it that you will like to say? If India has got certain rules, why should a foreign company not follow those rules? And if those rules are not followed, why action shouldn't be taken against that particular company?
See, I am little flummoxed by this narrative that the Twitter has been not following the Indian rules, Indian laws, and they were allowed to continue at least since 2014 onwards for 7 years. Are you suggesting, or the government of India suggesting, that they have been working in this country, functioning in this country without following any rules? If yes, then why they were allowed?
No, but I'm talking about the rules that were... One second. Ashutosh, 1 second. I'm talking about the rules which were recently framed by the government. It's not about what the company was doing since last 7 years. I'm talking about the social media intermediary rules. They were supposed to comply with the new rules. I'm talking about them.
I think.
Yes, Suresh Nakwa. Yes, Suresh Nakwa, I'll give you time to respond. Yes, Suresh Nakwa, 1 second. Let him quickly respond, then I'll come to you.
That's a narrative which has been artificially being stitched. Please understand this. The government has no problem with the Facebook because Facebook complies or whatever the government wants them to do. The Twitter wants to have its independence. It's not about this. It's about dominating the discourse. It's about suppressing the voice of dissent. It's something like this.
No.
So,
But who is trying to dominate the discourse here? Suresh Nakwa wants to respond. Who is trying to dominate the discourse here between Centre and Twitter, Mr. Ashutosh? Let Suresh Nakwa respond.
Let me come
Yes.
here.
Ashutosh, this is not your Aam Aadmi Party or your Jhoot Khoj or some platform where you will be spreading lies.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello.
This is not your Aam Aadmi Party.
Hello.
Guidelines were issued in
Who is this
February.
fellow? Who is this Nakwa?
Oh, Mr.
Who is this
Fellow.
fellow?
You remember who's Kashiram?
Is he-
You remember
who
who's
is this?
Kashiram?
Who is this?
You remember
Who is this
who's
fellow?
Kashiram?
You call
You
such
remember
people
who's
on the
Kashiram?
panel to answer.
Gentlemen,
remember
I'm
who's
not going to tolerate these personal attacks. I'm sorry. Mr. Ashutosh, I'm not going to tolerate these personal attacks. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I'm
No,
saying-
this is not going to be allowed here. I have asked you a simple question. I have asked you a simple question. I gave time to Mr. Nakwa to respond. One second, one at a time, please. Gentlemen, please calm down, both of you. Calm down, both of you. I am giving equal opportunity to both of you. Okay? Let Mr. Nakwa respond to what you said. I will come back to you,
No,
Mr. Ashutosh, and I'm not going to tolerate any kind of personal remarks on this show.
I will not tolerate anybody making a personal comment. And you are encouraging that. Let me put it bluntly.
February, 90 days, 3 months time.
No,
to
I'm not
give us
encouraging
all-
anything. I'm not
Why didn't you
encouraging
stop her?
anything.
Why didn't you stop him?
One second.
He has been.
Okay, one second. One second. I'm stopping both of you. One second. I'm stopping both of you right now here. No, one second. Mr. Ashutosh, Mr. Suresh Nakwa, fade us down, please. No, this is not going to be tolerated. I'm sorry. I am giving equal opportunity to both of you, and I've said that I will let Mr. Suresh Nakwa respond, then I'll come back to Mr. Ashutosh. Mr. Suresh Nakwa, 30 seconds to you. What is it that you have to say to Mr. Ashutosh's remark, and no personal comments, please?
Mr. Ashutosh is talking about dominating the narrative and creating fake narrative. These fake narratives are created by people like so-called alleged journalists like him. Now coming to the point, guidelines were issued in February. They were given 3 months to comply. They haven't complied with it, and that's why action is taken. Now my basic point is, why was handle of Honorable Vice President suspended? Blue tick removed. When handles of perverts and pedophiles, comedy platforms are blue ticked even when they are inactive for more than 1 year. I can quote 2 such handles. One is All India Buck -- and their founder G Khamba. G Khamba is inactive since 2015.
No, can I
All
talk
India
about
Buck
just
is
articulate
inactive
something
since last
written
1
in the
year.
letter which
Why
is
was
very
handle of Vice
consequential?
President non-blue tick?
1 second, Shehzad, 1 second. Okay, Suresh Nakwa, you've made your point. Suresh Nakwa, you've made your point. Shehzad, I'll come to you in just a bit. Now, Mr. Ashutosh, you have 30 seconds. Please respond.
I'm saying if somebody wants to make an issue out of Vice President blue tick removed, then somebody doesn't understand the technology at all. These are not manually done. These, if any account which is not active for the 6 months, it automatically gets inactivated, and that's why when it was reminded, they put it back. Now, if somebody doesn't understand technology, somebody doesn't understand the modern social media, what can you do about it? Such people are coming on the channels and making all kinds of allegations.
Okay. So there's no agenda. So there's no agenda. There's no agenda of Twitter. So there's no agenda of Twitter, according to you. Shehzad Poonawalla, please come in now. Yes.
Yeah. Before we get into the analysis, please understand what Megha Prasad, when she's reading the letter, and she will get a moment to do that again. Let me just quote a couple of things that she said very importantly in this letter. Just a bit of important aspect that even Ashutosh ji should listen to. Twitter's lack of commitment and efforts towards providing a safe experience for the people of India on its platform. The world's largest democracy has been amongst the first countries in the world outside the parent country of Twitter to enthusiastically accept and adopt the platform. Despite being operational in India for more than a decade, it is beyond belief that Twitter has doggedly refused to create mechanisms that will enable the people of India to resolve their issues on the platform. This is what the government's major concern is, that you do business here. You use this country to expand your platform. All very well. But when the people of India, a democratic country, requires a grievance redressal mechanism as required by the laws of India and the guidelines which have been issued, you deny it, and you do it over a consistent period of a decade. More importantly, essentially what the letter ends by saying is, and this is also consequential, that as a gesture of goodwill, Twitter is giving a one last notice to immediately comply with the rules, failing which
Right.
the exemption from liability available under Section 79 shall stand withdrawn and Twitter shall be liable for consequences as per the IT Act. Now, it is up to Twitter to decide that it can't have double standards for other countries and for India. It has to do what it does in America, also in India, because Indians are not second-class people. You have to follow the same norms for all countries. And if it doesn't, then that questions your accountability.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Stay on with us, all of you. Let me go back to my colleague Megha Prasad, because this warning, Megha, by the centre is very, very important. And, you know, in a way, centre is giving a very clear message. If you want to do business in India, you are liable to follow the Indian laws. You cannot become bigger than the laws here in India. You can't become the policy makers.
Right. Now, Hina, I just want to quickly sort of try and explain exactly where the problem and the way it stands currently right now between Twitter and the government of India. We all know that the intermediary guidelines were put in place by the government for compliance. 3 months was given to all the social media platforms. They were supposed to comply by 26th of May as far as these guidelines were concerned. We saw 26th May came and went, and there were still platforms who had not complied, which included Twitter. I'm not saying that Twitter was the only one who did not comply by 26th of May. But what happened after that, Hina, it's important for us to understand that every other social media platform has complied. That is as per our sources in the government of India. Every other platform has complied and in writing has communicated this to the government of India. Now, when it comes to compliance, we are talking about 3 different set of officers. One has to be a grievance redressal officer, one has to be a nodal officer. That sort of requirement was there in these modalities. Twitter happens to be the only platform that has not complied. What has Twitter very smartly done, Hina? And these are information about the story. This tells you exactly what the story is. Twitter went to the Delhi High Court and Twitter informed the Delhi High Court that we have complied with what the government wants and this is the man we have appointed. Now, there's a man by the name of Mr. Chatur who has been appointed as a grievance redressal officer by Twitter. And that person happens to be actually a lawyer who represents Twitter in the courts here in the national capital. The government very promptly, said that this cannot be accepted. It's unacceptable because Mr. Chatur happens to be a lawyer. He is not a part of Twitter, and he will not be allowed to hold a statutory position since he is not officially part of the Twitter team. So anyways, that was not accepted by the government. The Twitter later on hasn't even bothered to get any other person in the 3 other positions where they need people, those positions need to be filled as far as compliance is concerned. So what the government in its letter says, Hina, and I'm just reading out from this letter, which has now been shot to Twitter as a final and firm communication, rather last warning from the side of government to Twitter, saying you comply, else you be ready to face action. It says it is clear from your response that till date Twitter has, this is Government of India writing to Twitter, saying it is clear from your response that till date Twitter has not informed about the details of the Chief Compliance Officer as required under the rules. Further, resident grievance officer and nodal officer person nominated by you is not an employee of Twitter Inc., just like I said, in India as prescribed in the rules. The office address of Twitter Inc., as mentioned by you, is that of a law firm in India, which is not as per the rules. Finally, then the government has then communicated
Megha,
to Twitter.
Yes. Yeah. I'm just interrupting you there again, Megha. Apologies for that. I'll come to you in just a bit. My colleague Madhav joining us on the broadcast as well. We have with us Amit Malviya of the BJP with us too. Good afternoon, Amit Malviya. Thank you for speaking with us here on Times Now. What do we make of this letter that has now gone from the centre to Twitter? Is the message clear? Enough is enough. If you want to do business in India, then follow the rules.
I think if you read the letter, it leaves no one in doubt that Twitter, or for that matter, any other platform which has users in excess of 50 lakhs will have to abide by the new intermediary guidelines that the Government of India has put in, which is essentially to protect the interests of the people, the users on the platform, and it necessarily covers 4 broad areas around terrorism, around law and order, child pornography and sexual crime against women. It also mandates that these social media companies appoint a compliance officer, a nodal officer, and a grievance officer here. And that's not a big ask. People who are given this responsibility are the ones who should be residents of India and should be in the roles of the company concerned. And also the mechanism followed so that users of the platform could actually get resolution for their concerns or their grievances. So far, Twitter seems to be the only company that has not put in the requisite infrastructure in place. They had given the name of some official, but he happens to be a representative of a law firm and not an employee of Twitter as the law mandates. This letter from the government of India is very clear. If you want to do business here, which is one of your largest markets, then you have to comply with the laws of the land. And it leaves no one in doubt that the government of India will take action as enjoined in law if it is not followed in letter and spirit.
You know, with the kind of response that we've got from Twitter so far on the IT rules, the way it went to the Delhi High Court, what do you think could be the intent behind not following the IT rules here in India? Because it seems that all the tough warnings that have come from the center are, knocking on deaf ears. Nobody really seems to be paying any attention to it. What could be the intent according to you, Mr. Malviya?
Look, this is a debate that's happening across the globe. If you have heard the recent statements of the French president, for example, or how Nigeria had to block Twitter, from operating in the country, there is a lot of consternation and there's a lot of discussion that's going around whether these social media companies should also comply with the local laws of the land. And I think it's about time that some of these firms who have now grown into gigantic proportions realize that they can't be law unto themselves. And each democracy or each country, depending on its own laws and rules and regulations, will decide how some of these platforms operate. And I guess they would have little option but to comply with everything that every sovereign republic demands, and India is going to be no exception.
Are we likely to also take a cue from what other countries have started doing, like Nigeria, for example?
Look, the fact is that government of India in the past, on concerns of security, has blocked some very popular applications, including TikTok, PUBG, and the likes, because there were concerns around security. So it's not as if we are shy from taking tough decisions. And the world followed what India did. So I would, for the moment, reserve comment on what the government of India do and not preempt it. But I think this letter is very clear that we are not going to let our citizens who are in your platform suffer the ignominy of child pornography or crime against women and not have a redressal mechanism in place. We are very clear about that. Protecting the rights of the citizens is the primary responsibility of the government and not that of any private firm, including Twitter or, for that matter, any other social media company.
Last question before we let you go, Mr. Malviya. Now we know that there is already a Desi social media platform like Twitter, which is called as Koo. Many, politicians, many ministers as well actually put out tweets on Koo first and later it comes on Twitter. Do you think it is time now to probably, unfriend Twitter as far as the big leaders are concerned? Do you see that now happening if this kind of an attitude from Twitter continues?
The truth is that there is never a vacuum. And if Twitter, or for that matter, any other firm, does not adhere to the laws of the land, there will be other players. And Koo is a classic example. And let's not forget that social media firms have a certain life cycle, and it is imperative that they look at their own evolution and their own survivability. Twitter is not going to be around forever. We've had several platforms in the past that were very popular, and for whatever reasons, they were replaced by new ones and more nimble and more adaptable ones. So clearly, it is also in the best interest of companies who run businesses on internet to realize that nothing is forever. And if they continue to be obdurate about it, it's probably the right opportunity for someone else to step in and take over that space. And it's already happening in India. We have the entrepreneurial zeal. We have people who are willing to use homegrown platforms, and Koo is a classic case of that. And I'm sure there are several other platforms and several other apps that have emerged after some of the popular ones like TikTok and PUBG and others were banned. So clearly there's never a vacuum, and there are always players that will step up and rise to the occasion. Twitter, for that matter, any other company that wants to do business in India must keep that in mind.
With your permission, if I can just slip in one more very quick question, and this is about something that's quite intriguing. You all say that India is the biggest market for a company like Twitter. Then why are we seeing this kind of attitude, this kind of audacity from a company like Twitter, which is here to do business, and in a way it wants to do business here? Simultaneously, it is not ready to accept the rules. Whatever warnings are given, Twitter, it seems, doesn't pay heed to that as well. Why do you think that is happening?
I think sometimes people like to push their luck a little more than what they should. And I guess that may be the case. But the sooner they read the writing on the wall, the better it would be.
All right, Mr. Amit Malviya, appreciate you joining us here on Times Now and giving us your perspective. And this is clearly now becoming a big issue. We'll, of course, be keeping an eye as to what exactly Twitter has to say to this final warning that has gone from center. Let me now go across to my colleague Madhav as well. Madhav, now, an example if we take, today morning, we all woke up to the news of, the Vice President of this country, which is a constitutional post, his personal Twitter handle has been unverified. The badge that says that it is an authentic account was removed by Twitter. And, there was nobody to really go to. It was only after the backlash and the public outrage that it saw, only then the badge came back. So that is the only reason why these rules are important for grievance mechanism.
Well, Hina, I don't think we can link the two, but yes, as you rightly said, this is a part of the problem. Really, when there is a blue tick that is given or a blue tick that is removed, what is the process that is involved? Is there some transparency in it? No. At this point of time, at least Twitter, which has recently started once again certifying, those blue ticks which confirm the authenticity of the person who's tweeting, really that entire process, there have been a lot of question marks over what is the process that is followed, what are the criteria, is it activity levels, is it number of followers? Because each parameter that you look at, there are different levels and contradictions in how people have been certified with a blue tick, and and some of them in this particular case, as you rightly mentioned, have not been. But as you rightly put it, where do people go if they have an issue with what Twitter does? And that is exactly why compliance officers, grievance officers, etc. are required, and they are required to be employees of Twitter. Twitter has used all sorts of legal loopholes in the past. If you look at this letter itself, it says that the officers who have been mentioned are not employees of Twitter. The office address of Twitter Inc., as mentioned by you, is that of a law firm in India, which is also not as per the rules. So it has been seen that Twitter has tried time and again to avoid these intermediary rules which have been put in place for significant social media intermediaries which have over 50 lakh followers. And clearly, of course, the words that have been used in this letter are extremely strong. Not only is this a last chance that has been given, it has also come out to say in this letter, and I'm just reading out from the letter, it has said that Twitter has doggedly refused to create mechanisms that will create and enable the people of India to resolve their issues on the platform in timely and transparent manner through fair process by India-based, clearly identified sources. Leave alone proactively creating such a mechanism, Twitter Inc. is in the inglorious bracket of refusing to do so even when mandated by law. And I think this is really the crux of this letter, that the government of India, which on the 26th has in fact given that as a deadline, given 3 months before that to comply with. But despite the deadline passing, the government of India is saying that Twitter Inc.'s non-compliance with the rules as noted above, consequences follow. However, as a gesture of goodwill, they have been given one last notice to comply with the rules, failing which the exemption from liability under Section 79 of the IT Act 2000 shall stand withdrawn and Twitter will be liable for consequences. Going on further to say that users who are abused on the platform or are harassed or are subject to defamation or sexual abuse or become victims of a whole range of other abusive content must get a redressal mechanism that the same people of India have created through a due process of law. There's some very, very strong words there. A last notice being given to Twitter. We will have to see what Twitter does because the ball is very clearly in Twitter's court now.
Right. Absolutely. Now, Mr. Ashutosh, I want to ask you, in a nutshell, if I want to summarize the IT rules, they are trying to give some kind of accountability for the user if there is some problem. Is it too much to ask from a social media platform?
I think ban it. If a platform is not listening to the government of India, the sovereign government of India, what is the compulsion to continue with the Twitter and the Facebook in this country? I don't feel anything. I think that this country's constitution, the rule of law and the sovereignty of the country is more important than any social media platform working over it. And if the government of India feels that the Twitter is not following the rule of this country, are not working within the four walls of the constitution, then government of India should immediately ban. This country lived without Twitter and Facebook before the social media platform came into the existence. So I fail to understand what is this. Secondly, if the Twitter can remove the tweet of the Nigerian president and the American president, they are within their own domain, trying to exercise something which the world has not seen. So why we are worried so much about here in India? Let's live without Twitter. And why we are worried about it? Let's live without Twitter now. Remove it, ban it, block it.
Well, we aren't worried really about Twitter in India. We are only discussing what is happening. I think Shehzad wants to respond to you. Yes, Shehzad, quickly.
No, Hina, we are a country governed by rule of law. Of course, we have sovereign power, but that sovereign power is applied democratically and in the purview of the Constitution of India. And the Constitution of India applies to even those who choose to break our laws. So even if Twitter is not complying with the guidelines, they will get a due opportunity under due process of law mandated by the Constitution of India. And this is the point the government of India is making, that the government of India with a good, clean hands is approaching this issue, not based on one case or the other. It is saying that from very long, Twitter has not been playing fairly with the people of India. It's not been complying with the laws of India. It goes and reports to US Congress. It goes and complies with American laws. It accedes to the demands of Singapore government on a particular issue, but it applies a double standard as if it is the East India Company that's dominating the Indian people. Even then the government of India says that as per the rules and laws of this country, we will give you a last occasion to keep your side, to comply with it, to put forward your points of view. And if you don't, then the exemptions that you get under Indian law will no longer be available. Now, I do not understand why we should take an extremist position like Ashutosh said, except for a political brownie point to ban it. This is not how it works. This is not banana republic, sir. This is a constitutionally governed democratic country of India, sir. This is not North Korea.
Right. Okay. Ashutosh also wants to respond, but I'll give you time, Mr. Ashutosh, as well as Mr. Suresh Nakua, requesting all of you to please stay on with us. My colleague Madhav is live with us. Shehzad continues to be with us as well. We're heading into a very short break right now. More on this story on the other side. Stay with us. Welcome back here with us on Times Now. The big story that we are focusing on right now is the letter that has been written by the centre, which has been sent to Twitter. A final notice, in a way, has been given to Twitter to comply with the new IT rules after the deadline that was given to all social media intermediaries operating in India got over. And it is a very stern letter, in fact, that has been given by centre. And we have with us Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar joining us on the broadcast as well of the BJP. Okay, we have his reaction, in fact, coming in on the story. Let's listen in.
So Twitter wakes up today and decides to de-verify the Vice President of India and scores of others without assigning any cause, any reason, and expects to get away with a bland statement that they forgot to do it or they made a mistake. And this is really making Twitter increasingly look less and less like a responsible corporate, responsible internet intermediary, and more like a group of activists who are managing this very powerful platform based on whims and fancies and personal likes and dislikes. And this is totally unacceptable because it is required for these powerful platforms to be accountable to the people that use it. And that is why the intermediary guidelines were formed in February of 2021, that eventually these platforms that have so much of power cannot be run on the basis on some whims and fancies of some people sitting in San Francisco or their political ideologies. They have to be accountable. They have to be responsible to the consumers they serve, whether it is in India or whether it is in UK or wherever the consumers are. Accountability to the consumers is an absolute non-violable requirement of the internet guidelines that the government of India has put out in February, and Twitter is violating it day in and day out.
And our guests continue to be with us. Shehzad Poonawalla, who is a Times Now contributor and a lawyer. We have with us Suresh Naqvi, who's a political analyst, and Mr. Ashutosh, a political analyst. Mr. Suresh Naqvi, now, in the statement that Twitter had issued last time, it had mentioned that it is committed to India as a vital market. But then this kind of a non-compliance is also continuing. Do you think that probably India is now going to be seriously thinking about taking some stern action against a platform like Twitter, if it still doesn't respond positively to this notice?
In my personal opinion, whatever the ball is right now in Twitter's court. They have been issued this final notice, and it is their job to comply with the law of the land. I mean, it's my country, so it would be my country's rules that would be applicable. So if they are not ready to comply by that, they can take their own call. But whatever legal provisions are provided in the Act, and whatever legal actions are to be taken would be taken if they don't comply with it. It's as simple as that.
Right. I think Mr. Ashutosh also wanted to respond to that issue of banning Twitter, in a country like India, which follows the rules properly and following the rules only. It's not an arbitrary decision that the centre has taken. Centre has given a final warning despite the end of the compliance window.
See, Hina, I think I said earlier that those who live in the persecution complex, they always believe there is a conspiracy theories. If the India suffers from that, then it's rather sad. Nigerian president tweet has been removed. The president of Nigeria's tweet is removed. The president of America, Donald Trump's tweet was removed and deactivated. Now the issue is that in this country, I completely agree. There is a rule of law. Everybody has to follow that. But my worry is that Twitter has been very, very liberal with those who are the party spokesperson and those always peddle fake news. There is an IT head who's more than a dozen has been caught red-handed peddling fake news or something else. The issue is why the Twitter has not taken action against them. There is so much hate mongering on the Twitter. Why the action has not been taken against them? The action should be taken. The visuals from the Nigeria, the visuals from the Bangladesh, somebody beaten up over there, pitched here that how these people are doing. No action has been taken. If the Twitter has taken the action against these people, I think there should be a social audit of the Twitter, that who are these people who are hate mongering, who are people who are creating chaos, who are the people
but
who are
how are these issues related? I have asked you a different question. But Mr. Ashutosh, how are these two issues related? My question is very simple to you, that, why is it that Twitter, which wants to do business here in India, will not follow the rules here? Why? Should it be allowed in India, according to you?
I said it. If they are not following, the Nigerian government felt they are not following the rules. So they banned it. What for the government? Are you suggesting that the government of India is much weaker than the Nigerian government? Nigerian government had the spine. They realized that the Twitter is not following them. Twitter is mistreating them. So they banned it. Let government India also do the same thing. Nigeria is not a small country. It's also a big country in its own way. So
I need to comment.
My point is the government of India and the wants Twitter to behave in certain ways. Hate mongering should continue. The fake news up there should continue. No action should be taken. Why this chaos has happened? Because Sambit Patra's the manipulated tweet has really
That was not a
provoked the government.
manipulated tweet. That
That's
is
the issue.
Mr. has been journalist Ashutosh Gupta. The issue is sub judice.
Yes.
That was not a manipulated tweet.
Again, somebody,
journalist.
This is going to.
somebody is
You,
again
Mr.
trying to
has
make
been
personal
journalist.
comment. Somebody
Mr.
has
has
been
been journalist.
making comment.
Okay, one second. You are also, one second. One by one, gentlemen.
To make personal comment, I will
No,
not
one by one, gentlemen, one by one. Mr. Suresh Nakwa, okay, one by one. No, what kind of a language is this? I'm sorry, I'm moderating this discussion. No, give me time. I'm ensuring that, nobody uses any kind of personal attacks. No, I'm not allowing anybody. 1 second, I'm giving time and I'll ensure that there are no personal attacks, sir. 1 second.
I can't tolerate this. Somebody is making personal comment. You are keeping
Okay.
quiet.
Can
No,
we just
personal comments, we are also not going to tolerate against anybody. 1 second, you both please calm down. Shehzad wants to come in and no personal comments, please. This is something that needs to be followed. Yes, Shehzad.
Yeah, Hina, the platform of Times Now can be used to educate the viewers on a lot of things. Now, Ashutosh has said that why can't we ban them like Nigeria? I want to once again take his points on face value and good value and tell him that, sir, Nigeria can take a decision whatever it wants without following the rule of law or with following the rule of law, whatever that suits their democracy and their constitutionalism. In our country, we have a rule of law. So therefore, even if Twitter violates something, we have to give them, under principles of natural justice, an occasion to respond. We've set the rules, we've set the law. We have to go by the processes of law. If we randomly start banning something, then you will say that the government at the center is a fascist one, and your ecosystem will cry hoarse about how democracy is over in India. And therefore, we have to follow the rule of law. But that's not the real issue, Ashutosh. Nor is the issue that Twitter has not done action on XYZ spokesperson and has done action on ABC spokesperson. The real issue, Ashutosh, and with all due respect, is that Twitter has a set of guidelines which it applies arbitrarily. Now, Ashutosh, you have been in the media. When you were a senior editor-in-chief, your media channel, you were subjected to large amount of accountability by a lawful state oversight mechanism. And therefore, the power you had was curtailed by the accountability you had to give. Twitter wants all the power. It wants to get the exemption under Section 79. And then when it is made accountable, because it takes judgment calls, which it is not allowed to do under IT Act Section 79. It's a mere platform. Then it says, don't curb our free speech. But sir, if you have extra power, you have to have extra accountability. That is all the government of India is saying. And these intermediary guidelines have been set for everybody. So everybody has to comply with it. And Twitter does this in other countries. It goes for congressional hearings to America. Why is it treating India as a second-class country? You make money here. You have a subscriber base here. We are a thriving, happy democracy. You ought to listen to the people of India. If Ashutosh has a problem, then where does Ashutosh go? There is no grievance officer. There is no compliance officer. Why is this double standard for a person like Ashutosh and a person like Jim in America? That's the real problem, Ashutosh.
Hina, can I respond?
No, I need to comment.
Ashutosh, yes, please.
I need to respond to Ashutosh.
Yes, Suresh Nakwaji, just 30 seconds. Yes, 30 seconds, Ashutosh, then Mr. Suresh Nakwa. Yes, 30 seconds only, Ashutosh, please. And no personal comments, please.
This is not fair.
Hina, I think Shehzad
I will give you more time, Mr. Suresh Nakwa.
I must say that the Sajad made a brilliant point, and that's how the debate should be. It should be civil, without making any personal comment. I completely agree with Sajad what he said. So the issue is very simple. The issue is there has to be coordination between the freedom of expression in the new social media atmosphere. The issue is what should be the role of the government in this case, and the issue is what should be the rights of the citizen. So there has to be harmony between the citizens' rights, social platforms, new freedom of expression, and the government and the government in authority. I think that is where the problem lies. I completely agree with Sajad that any platform which is not listening to the government of India, violating the sovereignty of the country, they should be taken to the task.
Right.
And I think in that domain, I completely agree with Sajad.
Right.
But I disagree if somebody is making
30 seconds. Your 30 seconds are over now. Okay, Ashutosh, now let me give time to Mr. Suresh Nakwa, who's been patiently waiting. Yes, Mr. Nakwa, please make your point.
You know, there are some. Mr. Ashutosh Gupta was talking about fake news and fake news were being peddled and all. You might be knowing there are journalists and has been journalists and have been journalists who have been peddling fake news day in, day out. So they definitely want all social media to shut down so that their fake news factory continues going on. If you remember when Ashutosh Gupta was in one of the channels, this was the channel which had telecast a fake interview.
अब सुरेश नकवा जी ये पर्सनल अटैक्स छोड़ दीजिए ना, फेक न्यूज की तो हम बात ही नहीं कर रहे हैं। सुरेश नकवा जी, हम फेक न्यूज की तो बात ही नहीं कर रहे हैं। यहाँ पे सवाल हो रहा है, नहीं, वन सेकंड, सुरेश नकवा, दिस इज अनफेयर, दिस इज कंप्लीटली अनफेयर। नो Ashutosh, I am intervening. 1 second. Suresh Naqwa ji, this is unfair. I have asked you a question on Twitter versus NDA. No.
Yes,
Ashutosh, I am asking. I am intervening. No, 1 second. Let me ask him that question. Suresh Naqwa ji, let's not get into the fake news issue. Let's keep it for another day. Today, the focus is why Twitter. Okay, now let's finish it now, please. Let's finish it now and focus on the issue that we have right now in our hand, and that is about Twitter. Why should it not follow the law of the land if it has to do business here? It is a business entity. It is here to earn money.
Twitter has to follow law of the land and it has to comply with whatever the law says. I mean, and ours is not, as Shehzad rightly said, ours is not a banana republic or like some journalists want. You overnight ban Twitter. Journalists or have been journalists want. It can't be done that way. The law of land has to be followed. And I didn't bring in fake news. Some fake news peddlers and other fake news, their friends have brought in the fake news. So it's not my fault. Some names were taken by...
Okay, I have to now completely wind up this debate because, Okay, I have to wind up this debate now. I appreciate all of you for joining us on this discussion. Of course, it is a very, very important and a sensitive topic because the government this time has given a very clear message to Twitter, social media platform in India, and notice, of course, has been given that this is the last opportunity for you to comply with the Indian rules if you want to do business properly here in India. We'll see how Twitter will respond to it. Thank you very much, Mr. Ashutosh, Mr. Suresh Naqwa, and Shehzad for joining us here on Times Now. Heading into a short break.